mainstream media has a short attention span. They love clicks and views and so they're always shoving a new narrative, a new catastrophe for everyone to be enthralled with. Um, it's the shooting
Some
here, and then it's this
distraction.
shoot. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's always a new manufactured distraction for everyone. But you're living in the thick of it. But right now, it seems like it's all over, or it's died down, or something. But what's really going on? It's not over, is it?
You're listening to the Here Be Dragons podcast.
Welcome back, guys, to the Reformed Reset, part of Take Hold Studios. My name is Grant, and unfortunately, the weaker vessel, my wife Erica, is not joined with me because I am privileged to do another interview, and this time I have an old friend with me who has been on the podcast before. It was a while ago. My friend Jacoby Nelson. Jacoby, how you doing?
I'm blessed. I'm better than I deserve.
Amen. Guys, if you would please go check out the description below. You can find our website, our social media information, our merch store link, our Patreon link, and all of that good stuff there. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel right now. Hit the bell so you get notified when we release new content. There's also links to everything that Jacoby is up to, and we're going to talk about that during the interview, but all of that information is down below in the description. So make sure you go down there and check it all out, click it out, click all of it and check it out, and support what Jacoby is up to right now. So I hope by the end of this that you will be eager to do so. I think that's all that kind of nonsense I need to get through. So anyway, Jacoby, I know, a bit of your background, but I don't think anyone else does. Could you please give the audience a little bit of a background of yourself?
What version do you want? Short, long, or medium?
Let's
Probably the short.
go 5 to 10 minutes. That's
5 to
good.
10. Wow. You can get a whole testimony in 10 minutes. I'll try to keep it in 5 if possible.
Okay.
So, wow. I grew up in a faith movement church, partially. And after my parents' divorce when I was 9 years old, I ran the streets and got in a lot of trouble. Vandalism, theft, fights, police bringing me home, mom pretending to be mad at me when the police were there, but then just going about her business after the police left. Kind
This
of
was
in
Minnesota, am I right?
No, this was actually Lincoln, Nebraska,
Oh,
which is a lot of, has a high minority population, and everyone thinks they're from Compton there. So, well, I was originally from Portland. So I first started getting trouble in Portland, and my mom went to the farm in Red Cloud, Nebraska, which is, I don't know if you watch Better Call Saul, but that's where Kim Wexler is from, actually. So interesting fun fact. I was in wrestling in that school, and then we went to Lincoln, which is the capital of Nebraska, and it's a big party town, Cornhuskers, football, nothing to do there. In those days, Grand Island was the meth capital of the United States. So it was, lots of minorities live there. So it's like a large percentage of the city feels pretty ghetto. I guess I could put it that way.
all right.
And I went back and forth between Portland and Nebraska growing up through my adolescence, living with my dad, reading Kenneth Copeland books, Benny Hinn, Creflo Dollar, Jesse Duplantis. I just devoured all that stuff.
Yeah.
And long story short, when I was 17, I left home very confused, very broken, from 2 homes that were very dysfunctional in different ways. And when I lived with my mom growing up, I just ran around the streets and raised hell and got in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So on the other hand, I was always like in class, I scored high on all my tests, and I was in all the gifted classes, they called it. And I skated by with A's and B's without studying. And so this was good, but it was actually bad because coming from such instability, I didn't learn to apply myself. I didn't learn discipline. I didn't learn study habits because it was too easy for me to pass tests. So, and then, moving around all the time, I actually counted one time. I went to 14 different schools growing up because I moved around so much. And So when I was 17, I left home. I ended up with living with different Christian families. I wound up with a traveling prophet, self-proclaimed prophet, who went around to tent revivals where people danced and got slain in the spirit, and they did faith healing prayers and
Really
lots
cool.
of fiery preaching and music in the bark dust in the tent revivals. And I would
Right.
sometimes open up for the preacher with a few rap songs. So
Mm.
I was like doing Christian rap, traveling around with this prophet with his cholo son and another friend. And yeah, we're doing Christian rap. And I wound up, uh, he ended up leaving the church with a woman and a bunch of money. He was like a former heroin addict from Los Angeles and gigolo, and he fell back into some sin. Um, and I ended up living with this other family when I was 18 years old, trying to finish my senior year in high school. And they were ended up later on being a Calvary Chapel family. So they were just a really
Okay.
great Christian family, um, very hospitable, very good at loving people, and just awesome, awesome, great family. Still friends to this day. But I lived with them for almost half a year, and in my confusion, I forgot to mention that a friend of mine gave me Hank Hanegraaff's book Christianity in Crisis, which I read, and this did nothing but confuse me for a long time. But I accepted it because one of the reasons I accepted it was because in youth group, when I would have questions about faith or prayer, um, the answers that my youth pastor or others gave me weren't satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be like, this feels like faith is a force. It feels like kind of like Christian Science, or can you explain to me the difference? And their answers never really answered the question. Or in First Corinthians, it says, if you pray in tongues, let there be an interpreter. And I would ask about this and I'd never get good answers. And then when I read Hank Hanegraaff's book and I was like, yeah, these people do teach this. And it was emotionally painful, psychologically confusing for a very long time. And I didn't have the tools to process. I didn't have anyone to really talk to about it because all the people in Christianity I was running with were in that fold. But then
Mm-hmm.
this new family was outside of it. So it felt like a refuge for me. But still processing all that, I ended up moving back to Nebraska. And one day I got jumped by 5 kids, and I went to work. I was working at Taco Bell, and there was a girl there I kind of had a crush on. And I had a big headache because these kids had pounded me up a little bit. And my brother jumped in, he helped me fight back. And um, one of the, I mentioned that everyone in Lincoln thinks they're from Compton. That's kind of one of the reasons they beat me up, because they were these kind of like, wannabe gangsters. And I told them they were wannabes and that they weren't from LA. And they're like, what? We're true. And they just started, punching me. And
Right. Now
so
they're
I
proving
went
it
to
to you.
work. Yeah, they're going to show me.
That's right.
But went to work, and the girl gave me a hit of weed, and I hit it, and I enjoyed it. I, just laughed a lot or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and this started a snowball effect of new friends. I went back into my old life when I ran around the streets and got in trouble, and found a new group of party friends who had access to a lot of weed. And later on, they had access to LSD and a lot of meth. And sometimes, we did a lot of partying. There was a lot of um, just troublemaking, theft, fights at parties, um, real crazy group of friends. And this was my life for 6 or 7 years. At one point, I attempted suicide, and that was probably the result of having so much potential and knowing what's right as far as what with Christ. Sometimes I would be drunk and I would start rambling about the Bible to people, and they'd tell me, you should be a preacher, and so, very confusing young adult life. And I was a complete loser, basically. Like it was all a competition for who could be at the top of selling the drugs. And it
Mhm.
was like you're competing against your friends, the friends you had their back at parties if there's a fight, but then you're trying to beat them against them to be the ace.
Hmm.
So, these are all white kids that drove, 20-inch rims with switches and stuff like that. And I got in and out of jail several times. One time I went to jail for 6 months for carrying a gun and breaking into a car. I used to steal cars and steal stereos and all this. And I was a total loser. And I knew I had so much potential, and I was so lost and so sad. And one night I was drinking and walking down the street, looking at the sky and looking up at the stars, thinking about God. And back when I lived in Portland, I used to go to this place called The Push, which was like alternative Christian music with Christian moshing. And somebody there from one of the bands did a talk one time that I always remembered. And they said, if you want to talk with God, just he already knows what's in your mind and heart. Just tell him your honest thoughts, you know? So like he's your best friend. And so that's what I would do. Even though I wasn't walking with God, occasionally I would have moments of clarity where I just have this very open, transparent conversation with God. And I say, God, I'm so far gone. I'm out there. And if you can bring me back home, please bring me back. And then actually through listening to different rappers, some rappers rap about God a lot. One of my favorite rappers back then was Outkast, and then there's Tupac, and then like Lauryn Hill and others, CeeLo. They talk about God, and I had a really strong foundation in Scripture, and this would just get my wheels turning, thinking about God and how lost I was. And so I went with some friends to a lake, and they were passing around a spliff, and they were kind of trying to pressure me to hit this blunt. And I was like, no, I can't, because a couple of years earlier, I got a job in Alaska as a commercial fisherman. And 2 days, or 1 or 2 days after this lakeside overnighter, I was going to go back to work, and they do drug tests. So I hit the blunt like one time because of their pressuring. And then I failed the drug test, and they told me, okay, come back in 3 weeks. When the trip is over, we'll test you again and we'll get you on the boat. And this failed drug test changed my life. It was an answer to that prayer I just mentioned.
Yeah.
So I went down to NorCal. I visited an old friend, and we went partying at the bars for a few days. And then on my drive back north, I stopped in Medford, and I visited that old family that I knew. And so for 6 or 7 years, I was in this dark life with commercial fishermen, drug dealers, street hoodlums, guys that, I still really love and I really care about. I don't talk to them much, but once in a while, I get to talk with them here and there. But they were almost like family to me back in those days.
Right.
So anyway, I stopped and saw that family, and their son had gone on missions trips, was now leading a Bible study, was married. I think he had his first child at the time. And I saw the joy in their face. I saw their countenance. They had this godliness, this love, this joy, this warmth. And I'm like, wow, this is completely foreign to me. And I actually used to live with you. Like, this could have been my life, like something that had meaning, something that had substance, something that had God. And it really rocked me. So I prayed in my hotel room to come back to God. And long story short, I got very radical about reading through the scriptures, trying to figure out, what do I believe? Because from that past confusion with the faith movement. And then I got introduced to Applegate Christian Fellowship, which was Calvary Chapel. For me at the time, it was just what I needed. It was like a breath of fresh air. It's like, we believe in the spiritual gifts, but not all the charismania. And we read through the scriptures chapter by chapter, verse by verse. And less than a year later, I ended up at Calvary Chapel Bible College for my first semester. It's a 2-year school. but it took me 3.5 years to get through it because I went back and forth between fishing and
Right.
school to pay for it. But while there, I made many new friends from around the world. You were one of them. And several friends through those semesters, just by reading the scripture and having questions and not getting satisfactory answers in class, became Reformed, or at least Reformed Baptist, listening to
Right.
Piper, listening to MacArthur and other guys. And like James White would say, that's why Calvary Chapel keeps producing Reformed people,
That's
because
right.
they tell them, read your Bible, know your Bible. And
Exactly.
yeah, so then I ended up Reformed Baptist. I ended up at Mars Hill Church for a while, and a lot of good things there as far as being locally missional. I never heard much about missions at all when I was there. But then Mark kind of started going off the deep end, like trying to enlarge his platform, running around with guys like
Yeah.
Rick Warren and Stephen Furtick. And he had the book kind of scandal thing where he bought a whole bunch of copies of his own book. And then I had my own personal experience with a close friend and myself about this kind of overbearing, domineering, I don't know how to put a word on it, but the leadership had this elitist mentality, I guess, and it was kind of spiritually abusive, where
Yeah.
something wrong was there. And that came out. Several of the leaders called Driscoll out on it, and he couldn't accept the church discipline and left the church.
Right.
I wound up, actually, I tried to get a crabbing job on the Washington coast. Those guys, we didn't vibe because they were very crude, and I didn't like their jokes. I didn't participate or laugh at their jokes. And they decided that they basically probably just used me to help get all their crab pots ready, and then decided not to take me out on the water. You
Yeah.
know, this like radical Christian guy with all these super salty sailors, super crude. Like, I've been on a lot of different boats, and they were exceptionally crude. And
Oh
so
wow. Okay.
we didn't click. So I left 2 or 3 tracks under each of their pillow, and I left. And then, not knowing where I would go, I ended up with living in a friend's basement in Minneapolis at going to John Piper's church. And I was also going to this Sovereign Grace church that was there in the area that Piper would actually visit when he was not preaching.
Okay.
So John Bloom, who's director of Desiring God, was the worship leader there. Really good church, but I wasn't there for very long. So I was there, and then I applied at Bethlehem College and Seminary. I got accepted. I started window washing, and I was so, I guess, ambitious or passionate about going to this seminary that I worked really hard at commercial window washing. I'm in Minneapolis in the winter, putting antifreeze in the water in order to be able to wash these huge storefront
Oh my
windows
gosh.
all through Minneapolis. And I worked myself too hard drinking energy drinks, and I gave myself tennis elbow, and I couldn't do it any longer because of the pain in my elbows.
Jeez.
So yeah, so I ended up at a friend's house in I drove back to California, and well, I ended up fishing again in the summer on this boat I worked for 7 years. This would have been my 6th or 7th year. And my buddy there was chatting with some girl online, and it was kind of ironic, I guess, because at Bible college he would never talk to any girls. He had super strong boundaries, and he was hyper spiritual and stayed away from girls. And here he is, kind of talking with this girl online from the Philippines, and he's like, "She's on fire. She's like so missional, and she's praying for all these countries." And so I'm sitting there, I have no job, and I'm like, check this website out. And I was like, okay, I'll make a profile. It's like some free Christian dating website.
Okay.
So I said, I'm going to put everything on here that would possibly scare somebody. All my doctrinal distinctives, all my views on Christianity. I'm going to show pictures of my
Beautiful
tattoos.
strategy.
Yeah, so that I
Nice.
can scare everyone away. And
Right.
what happened is I met my wife on there, and well, she was one of the first pictures I saw, and I wrote her, and I said, "You have a nice smile. What kind of church do you go to?" And we jumped off that website and started chatting on Facebook. And she said, just so you know, I'm not here trying to meet a guy. I'm just trying to make friends because I want to be a missionary. I'm trying to meet other Christians from around the world. And her English was good because she had an English school and she was a English teacher for kids, but it wasn't nearly as good as it is now after being married to me for 11 years. But
And she was from.
she was from Odessa,
Okay.
so in Ukraine. Yeah.
There you go.
So
Okay.
she asked my testimony. I told her my testimony, and then we started Skyping, and we Skyped a lot. We phone calls a lot. We just got to know each other really, really well. And in some cases, I almost recommend that better than dating in person, because when you're dating in person, people tend to like wear masks and put on their best behavior. And this was more like we were very intentional about getting to know each other for the purpose of
Right.
possible marriage, and asking, very intentional questions. And we knew each other very well before I even met her in person. We video chatted and talked on the phone for several hours for 6 months. I went fishing, and I did some black cod fishing in the summer. And she knew that I was going to go to Bethlehem College and Seminary, but I said I should come out to Ukraine and meet you in person, so I can meet your friends and your family and your church. And she actually said no, because she didn't want to take me away from what my plans were with seminary and everything. And so I said, okay, well, would you like me to not to call you anymore? And she said, no, you can call me. And anyways, I ended up flying out, and not much, it wasn't too much longer later, we were married. The church she went to at the time had a missionary training center, one in Montana and one in Odessa. Is
Oh, wow.
4 or 4.5 months of intensive missionary training. You're there like all day for like 4 months, 5 days a week. So we thought, as newlyweds, it would be a great way to start our marriage. So we did that, and we served at that church for a little while, helping with their English clubs and English camps. And I never pictured myself doing English outreach ministry, but that's what we did. We did a lot of that, and I saw how effective it was in Ukraine, because a lot of people in Ukraine want to learn English, want to practice their English with native speakers. So, this is a great medium around which to have conversations. And so I kind of developed my own English teaching style with animated slides and conversation questions and activities. We ended up at the Presbyterian Church in Odessa. For a long time, I was still Reformed Baptist, but 3 or 4 years ago, I was convinced of fetal baptism. And so, yeah, just trucking hard. We did that for English outreach ministry, reach hundreds of, if not thousands of people with gospel seeds.
Awesome.
Not the responses to salvation that you would love to see, but many people
Able to
we made
share.
friends with and planted seeds. And then when COVID came, I started reassessing, maybe we should do something else. So for that time, we were focused on English Club and just practical outreach and service, doing camps. We did a basketball camp, we did a beach camp, we did these English outreaches. I just really started getting a passion to go deeper with learning my theology again. And we helped with a church plant called Lighthouse in Odessa. My wife led the worship team and started studying in a biblical counseling school here in Ukraine called Coram Deo, which is affiliated with CCEF. And then I just started thinking, I started seeing a lot of bad theology in Ukraine and the influence from the West as far as kind of like postmodernism leaking in, and lenses, and this kind of ecumenicism, and then later on critical theory stuff. And I'm just very concerned about the state of the church. There's a lot of legalism generally. The largest denominations are unhealthy, in my opinion. And so I thought, you know what? I need to reach more people with sound theology. So now, then before the war, what I had crypto investments that started doing really good. Now they're not so hot, but at the time they were really good. And there was one day where I was almost a millionaire, on paper at least.
Yeah.
But well, I decided I want to start an online theological teaching hub that's actually crypto based. Won't go too much into that because I'm going to be building that for the next couple of years probably. But I decided I'm going to go to seminary and not to be a pastor. I see myself more as a prophet kind of role where I'm just a truth teller, because I have such a passion for truth and sound theology, and pastors have to be too nice. And I tend to be more confrontational, I guess. And so that's what's my new focus, was starting some small businesses to generate revenue to fund that ministry. And then the Russians were all on the border. We decided to buy a car and have emergency bags in case we had to leave and everything. And we put our business plans on hold, except we did purchase that small piece of land to start building a glamping site with a buddy of mine here in Ukraine. And that's underway now. But yeah, so now going forward in the future, that's what I want to build. But when the war began, our whole focus began help refugees, basically in any way we can.
Yeah.
And so
Did you want to go
yeah.
into specifically some details? So wonderful story. That was awesome. And so for how many years now have you and your wife been in Ukraine as missionaries? It's how many
Almost
years now?
over 11, so going on
Over
12.
11. And
Yeah.
so what I've been able to, I'm so glad that we've been able to at least stay in touch. You know, for all the horrors Facebook is, there is a lot of benefit.
Yeah,
But also
there's a
being
lot of
on your
good
mailing
Christian
list.
groups. I learn a lot from some of the different
Yeah.
groups on there. So yeah.
But anyway, as soon as the war hit, though, yes, a lot of your focus shifted towards refugees. Could you share more details about what you guys had to go through and how you shifted some things, and just kind of bring us from a few months ago till today?
Sure. And I guarantee you that will be much shorter than this
Okay.
personal story I just shared. So February 24th, 5 a.m. Well, I think it was 2 days before that, Putin gave a long speech, and he was talking very hot-headed and about getting certain people in Ukraine back, like in revenge, certain people in Odessa, and we're like this, because for a long time I was very skeptical they were going to invade. But when I heard that speech, something was like, yeah, this isn't good. Like, especially with like Biden being in office and the way he pulled out of Afghanistan, and they were kind of provoking him with talking about NATO. I later came to think that they intentionally provoked him to invade. That's my personal take. But our original plan was to stay in Odessa and help people there, but everyone was trying to get out of there that we were trying to help. And so a friend of ours is trying to get on a train and she couldn't. We just invited her and another friend to hop in our car with us and cross the border. And our plan was to leave for 1 week and then reassess after that. We ended up in Chisinau, Moldova. We met a pastor there, and his wife became very good friends of ours. They put us up, and in their church, there was 2 empty Sunday school rooms. And I said, can we put bunk beds in here? So people were writing us asking if they could donate money to help. So we were getting like record donations coming in, more than we ever had in the past decade in ministry. And so we bought bunk beds to put up in there. And then we bought food for the refugees. And we bought toys for the refugee kids. We helped people get on trains or buses or vans or get paperwork to get to other countries. Any way we could help people. The requests for help were coming from everywhere, and they were different kinds of requests. If we could give people rides, whatever. Our head was spinning. We were constantly checking the news, trying to figure out who's getting bombed now, what's going on, and just trying to keep up on all of that. Feeling a bit traumatized. I had taken several profits out in crypto. We were in the process of remodeling our flat. I had a bunch of stuff I bought there. All this technological stuff you see here, we left behind. Like we just left behind a lot of stuff. And 2 months later, after I went to the States for 2 weeks, I was able to drive into Odessa, and we were able to get all of our stuff loaded up.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, but we didn't know that we would have had that opportunity. We thought we
Right.
maybe were leaving it behind for good. And so then my wife's friend, her name's Galia, she started being an interpreter for medics in Chisinau, Moldova, that were they had a medic team, a humanitarian organization did. And then my wife joined her, and the short of it is they later hired her on into the office there to work in logistics for food distribution and stuff.
Okay.
And now they normally don't, but they hired her remotely, so she's very busy here, still going at it to help people get food remotely. I'm not
Wow.
supposed to
That's great.
actually talk too much about that or what the
Yeah,
organization
fine.
is or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um, so what, that's great. So I guess I kind of want to have you share with people what does your ministry look like moving forward now,
mhm.
and also we kind of talked about this before we hit record of mainstream media has a short attention span. They love clicks and views and so they're always shoving a new narrative, a new catastrophe for everyone to be enthralled with. It's the shooting
Some
here, or then it's this
distraction.
shoot. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's always a new manufactured distraction for everyone. But you're living in the thick of it, and I know that anyway, we could get into that too, as far as propaganda and the both
Right.
sides of this thing. Um, but right now it seems like it's all over, or it's died down or something. But what's really going on? It's not over, is it?
Well, about a week or so ago, I happened to meet a guy. I was at a restaurant actually with the Correct Church guys. We were hanging out, chatting, and there was a guy at the table who's head of the foreign volunteers in the military.
Mm.
And so we were
Wow.
all having a discussion with him. It was really interesting. And before they were firing, just bombarding with missiles. And he said now they're more focused on drone strikes. So while the Ukrainians have been able to push them out of Kiev, push them out of Kharkiv, in Mariupol, there's talks about cholera because there's all these dead bodies left around. And they say the Russians intentionally opened up the water and flooded the city. So now there's cholera there. Um, and in my opinion, Russia lost the war in the first week, but that doesn't mean that it's over. It doesn't
Right.
mean that you should relax. It means that there's still much fight left. I just think they shot themselves in the foot with bad decisions and underestimating Ukraine. And Ukraine was
Yeah.
backed with a lot of weapons and money. God knows where all that money really went, but I'm sure they used some of it for good. And so many people sending first aid kits, IFAC kits, which are personal first aid kits for soldiers, body armor, vests, knee pads, gloves, generators, solar power banks, all kinds of stuff. I went to the States for 2 weeks. I brought back a bunch of stuff and then distributed it. And I bought a bunch of camping equipment. We can talk about that more in a minute. But basically what I want to say is it might not be the hot thing. It's natural for people when something first starts to, have wide eyes about it or to be alarmed. And then over time, it's like people are still dying. People were dying in Syria a lot, but nobody, I don't want to say nobody cared, but nobody was paying attention. Nobody knew, nobody, general people. It's whatever the media wants to highlight in the moment, whatever they want to focus on. And there's tragedies happening all over the world every day. That doesn't mean that people don't care. But we only have so much computing power. We have so much bandwidth that we have to try to live our lives. I think it was like 2 weeks ago, my wife was looking at her social media feed and she said, people in Ukraine have forgot about the war. Like people started posting normal things again.
Yeah.
For the first 3 months, it was only posts about the war. And now people started, like a few days ago, I didn't have a chance to decompress since the war started. I went to the States, came back, had to move out of Odessa, across to Western Ukraine, had to go back there again and back. And we're having to stand in long lines to get gas in our car. The place we live in is just temporary, trying to figure out how to get situated
Right.
here. And then getting ready for these camps that we're going to do in August. I just had so much on my mind that I needed to decompress. So I binge watched Stranger Things and Better Call Saul. So I got caught up on those TV shows, but it was like I wasn't watching movies for
Yeah.
mostly the first 3 months of the war because so much going on, so much to think about. But
Sure.
so things do feel like, even for Ukrainians, that they're slowing down. But I would say it's like, don't go to sleep. If you're here or you're fighting, there's still a serious fight. So we shouldn't get too laid back.
Right.
We shouldn't get too lax. We have to be vigilant. We have to continue fighting. I don't trust the American government. I don't trust the globalist elitists. I don't trust the Russian government or the Ukrainian government. But
Yeah.
I do have a very, fervent prayer that we can get Russia out of our backyard, and then we can turn and fight the globalists. I personally believe the globalists are a greater threat, but the immediate
Yeah.
threat to our lives are the Russians. So,
Right.
and of course, I don't mean all Russians. There's a
Right.
lot of
Yeah.
Ukrainians, well, I don't know a lot, but it seems like a lot, that are very bitter and very like hating all Russians.
Right.
And I think we got to be very careful about that. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, so
Very helpful to point out. I think your perspective, even being someone who's have to live through needing to move and dealing with these people who are literally very tangibly suffering suddenly. It's not like this third world country that is just for decades been in shambles, which is the state of many countries across the world. This is kind of cataclysmic. I know there's always been some sort of conflict with Russia and political differences and stuff throughout the years, but to hear your balanced perspective of there's tragedies going all over. This isn't the only place that anything's happening, and then even hearing your balanced view towards Russians, which really frustrated me. We could talk about virtue signaling and the terrible thing that is, but when I kept seeing McDonald's closes all stores in Russia, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, this isn't all every single person in Russia, is our enemy all of a sudden. And that happened with multiple companies and stuff. And to hear you say, like, we got to understand that it's not every single person over there. That's very helpful.
yeah, they're doing this virtue signal and sanctioning basically the everyday people, but then they're actually leaving the banks a back door to continue selling oil. So it's all a charade, is what it comes down to.
Yeah. So what? So you mentioned these camps a couple times this summer that you have going on. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I went to the States and I was buying first aid stuff. I was buying hazmat equipment in case of a chemical attack. I started thinking and praying about what's a niche I can fill that other people aren't doing, because there's so many people giving and trying to help Ukraine. What can I do that's maybe a niche that other people aren't tapping into? And my friend has land in the Carpathians, and I wanted to build lodging up there to bring refugees.
Yeah.
And so I started buying camping equipment to go up in the mountains and start building. And then when I came back to Ukraine, I met up with my friend and we actually went and visited the mountains. And there's a Christian guy here in Ivano-Frankivsk who's him and his wife are professional hiking guides in the mountains. And they said, we would like to do something for refugee kids.
Right.
And I thought, that's perfect. That's what we need to do. And so I was like, we need to, before I do any other business ventures in the mountains, we need to just do some camps for refugee kids.
Yeah.
And So we're planning 2 7-day, well, they're 9-day camps, but 7 full days in August. It's the perfect weather in the mountains there. And Ukrainian leaders will be joining us from different parts of Ukraine. We'll be inviting refugee kids from all over Ukraine. We'll have a we'll have an application process where we screen the kids and try to find kids that are really needy for this. And we're asking people that want to give to sponsor a kid for $200. So we're trying to do 50 kids at each camp, 100 total kids. $200 sponsorship makes you a pen pal with one of those kids. So that's more than the kid needs for camp, but we'll be able to buy equipment that we use for future summer camps. And some of the Ukrainians coming to help will be translators and such who will want to pay, because a lot of them will be out of work, or they might be, well, they're coming to help with camp, but they don't have work. So we'd like to be able to pay them something. So the $200 sponsorship just goes towards the whole camp. And then everyone that sponsors one camper, ages 13 to 19, we then connect them online so they can make a pen pal. And our basic goal is to bring them up there. It's a really beautiful, good, great place to meditate on God, talk with God. We want to help them have the time of their life, something really memorable, juxtaposed to what they've experienced this year with the war, and make new friends in Christ.
Yeah,
So
that's wonderful.
Yeah, so that's what all my focus is on right now, trying to get situated. We're living in this place that's actually a sauna house. And so nobody had rented it for months. So there was cobwebs and grime and dust. It was horrid. We had to clean so much. And there's no closets or dressers. Usually when you rent a place in Ukraine, it comes furnished. But there was no dressers, no closets. So we had to figure out how we're going to live here. But it was great. It's a blessing because our dogs can be here. The rent was decent. We have another couple staying with us temporarily.
Yeah.
And then when we start the camps, we'll basically move out, and we have to find another place in September. So yeah, we're all,
Awesome.
My wife's continuing to serve with the humanitarian org, and I'm getting ready for the camps. I've been a bit overwhelmed, which is why I haven't been posting much, but Lord willing, we're going to make it. So
good. The Lord's given you good works before you to do. So that's awesome. And this is what I want everyone, if you're listening and you want to, there's a way you're thinking, how can I help and support? Again, like you said, it's not over. They've got refugees all over the place that they're still helping. I know some of these cities have been battered pretty bad with bombs and stuff. There's rebuilding and stuff going on. And these are families from
many families are separated, and many people have lost their homes. So
when you give to these churches and these ministries, you're enabling them to then extend a hand to give and provide support in any way that you can. And there's the Jeep project that the CREC has, and that's the one that I've shared, as well as Jacoby's ministry. And so his ministry links and stuff like that is going to be in the description. And that's what I want you guys to go.
I'm helping them with one of their camps. I'm sorry to jump in, but
good.
I'm helping the CREC with one of their camps in July, and they took me out, showed me this location, and they're going to help me with one of our camps. We're doing 2 camps. So if somebody wants to come out and join us for camp, get in touch with me, and we'll have more info. I'm actually in the process of editing videos for advertising, all that right now.
Very good.
So,
well, good. When you share it, we'll share it. And consider sponsoring a kid. That sounds like a really wonderful opportunity. Just really cool. What do you see, Jacoby, for Ukrainians, as you've done missionary work there, as far as the greatest need spiritually in the church or the culture in general? Is it very similar to America, or is it a little different?
Well, everywhere needs the gospel in many ways, as we both know well. But there's a unique culture and a unique focus here. I would say, the influence of the Eastern Orthodox Church is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And then after them, the largest church denominations are, I hate to use labels, too much because every church has its own nuance or uniqueness, but general I think this is starting to change with the Armenian legalistic Baptist church and then very like traditional Pentecostals with head coverings.
Interesting.
And so the Baptists, the Pentecostals, and the Charismatics. And then, the Reformed churches are generally usually pretty small. There's a few that are starting to make inroads into having more influence, which is really great to see. I believe that truth will prevail, but
Amen.
This is my own speculation that someone who's serious about truth and correcting error, because I know how error hurts people, but at the same time, when you have a church that at least has the Trinity, deity of Christ, the general gospel proclamation,
Right.
even if their theology can be inconsistent, sometimes they're genuinely trying to love people and kill sin in their life.
Right.
And trying to grow in God. And I still see the kingdom expanding through that noise. I don't think it's ideal. And I think over time, the yeast will spread more
Right.
through the dough and there will be more truth and more light. But God is still building his kingdom through churches that are in error, whether they're 30% in error or 50% in error. There are cultural things where people say that's just the culture here. Like we don't get tattoos or we don't play cards or something legalistic like this. These are the things I generally tend to do on purpose when I hear it, because maybe I'm more like a Martin Luther, where he said, like, if Satan accuses you of having a beer, then drink another. So
cheers.
So cheers. But there's it's like I want to push back against legalism that I think isn't helping the gospel, and they say, oh, that's the culture here. And I'm like, that's not the culture, that's sin. Right. Legalism is sin. Legalism is idolatry. So we need to discern, we need to divide, draw a line between what's actually is cultural and what is Americans trying to impose Americanism on. Because there's two sides to that conversation. We don't want to comment like Americans and be like, this is the gospel, when we're really just imposing our American culture. But at the same time, I see a lot of missionaries tend to, I guess the way I would put it, be too nice to Ukrainians, because their mission is Ukrainians. So they will pat them on the back, flatter them, praise them, no matter what. And that's and if most Ukrainians would say to those missionaries, it's just our culture, they would just say, okay, and go along with it. And I'm like, no, that's not helping anybody. Like, we need to disciple them in the truth.
Sadly, postmodernism's push the multiculturalism that missionary agencies or church denominations have adopted, and thought when we go into another culture, right, they take this multiculturalism viewpoint. There's nothing really wrong with their culture. We just need to get them to sign the profession of faith card, and then we're doing our job, as if culture is not something that God's ever interested in redeeming. It's nonsense.
That's a perfect way to put it. He has to redeem the culture. Yeah.
Right. Like there is a Christian way to do all these things. So
that's what the Christian is culture. Like ultimately, it should be shaping the culture profoundly. So.
That's good. Awesome. I want to just, I want to jump back really far back into your testimony. You talked about rapping and opening up these things. And I just want to say that one of the, I met you at Calvary Chapel Bible College in Marietta, California. And again, right, a denomination that we'd say there's a bunch of error that needs to be corrected, but I think still a lot of good, still a lot of people preaching through books of the Bible and trying to kill sin in their life and expand.
They don't like critical theory, and they don't like Joel Osteen, so that's good.
Yeah, amen. And they don't like, and they still hold to, male clergy or male, ordination for their pastors and stuff. So there's still a lot of things.
Some of them are closet Calvinists.
Yeah, there's those too.
Yeah.
That's good. But anyway, when we were at school, every semester they had a talent show, although they called it an edification display. Remember that?
Right.
But you rapped. You had a spoken word rap kind of thing that you did. All I remember of it was Rose of Sharon in it.
Rosa Chevron. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. And I think I've even told you that before. You need to do that again and post it up or something so people can hear it because it's good stuff. But anyway, I have that memory stuck in my head from that. So
Yeah, that was a
anyway.
13-minute spoken word. And
Is it that long?
it was 13 minutes. Yeah. And I
Oh,
had
it
it
didn't feel
memorized
that
for a
long.
long time, and I can't even remember how it starts now. But
I don't have it.
if I got it like the first line, I could probably get
Yeah.
going again or something. Yeah.
That would be, yeah. So anyway, if
Who
you
is a
need,
rock?
yeah.
Have you?
And then, well, you talked about, I think it's Jeremiah, but it was, yeah, let him who boasts boast in this, that he knows me.
Let not a man boast in wisdom, strength, or riches, but let the man who boasts boast in this. If he knows me, I execute righteousness, love, and justice. Who has ascended to the heavens and gathers the winds in his fist? Who moves? Who can turn it back? Who is a rock? Have you not heard? Have you not been taught? What's my name and my son's name? If you know the most fairest of tens of thousands, the Rose of Sharon. I remembered.
You're listening to the Here Be Dragons podcast.